Welcome to the Diversity and Inclusion on Air podcast. This podcast is a program of the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges Diversity Matters initiative. The podcast explores various issues related to diversity and inclusion in the veterinary profession and provides the AAVMC an opportunity to offer ongoing diversity programming to our member institutions as well as all veterinary professionals. My name is Dr. Lisa Greenhill, and I am AAVMC's Chief Diversity Officer. Now, today's show is super special. I don't want to just say, oh, it's like the afternoon special that maybe some of us who are people of a certain age would see, like when we got home from work, from school at 4 p.m., those kind of shows. But it's actually special because it's one of the few that we've also accepted an external pitch. Normally, we kind of generate our show topics internally and from our membership, but this is one of the few where I was pitched this topic and was like, that's a really interesting topic. So let's do it. So today we're actually going to talk about substance abuse and recovery in veterinary medicine. And I'm sure that there are folks like, how does that have to do with diversity? Well, it is a life-changing kind of thing. And if you've ever known anyone who has experienced this particular experience or challenge, you know that it can be, a lifelong thing, not the abuse part, but the recovery part, right? And really thinking about the things and the ways in which we move through life with these particular lived experiences. And those are some things that we need to be mindful of as we engage one another, right? And so I just want to kind of give a little bit of data from a study that I saw from 2015 that was published in JAVMA. And it was a survey of veterinarians about kind of some of their experiences or thoughts around this topic. And 72% of the respondents indicated that they had worked with someone experiencing substance abuse, and 68% said that their concern about substance abuse within the profession either matched or exceeded their general concerns about the topic, about this issue and this challenge with the general public, which I found really, really interesting because even though this was published in 2015, almost a decade ago, we all know that the kind of public media piece around kind of just the opioid epidemic and all of these challenges related to, the widespread use and now some legalization of things like cannabis and some of the other things that are kind of going on, issues with fentanyl, all of these things are kind of in the zeitgeist as ongoing pieces of conversation and topic, right? And so I thought that those data points were really interesting. So, I know that there has been a number of workshops here and there and some papers, but having been in the profession for more than a minute, a long time, over 20 years, generally, it's not something that I hear a lot of kind of conversation about. It's still kind of a shadowy topic. And so I'd really kind of like to spend a little bit of time today with my guest, shining some light on this issue. And so I'm very, very happy to welcome to the show today, Doctors Amber Labelle, Cristie Kamiya. Did I do it right?
Kamiya.
Kamiya. I wrote it phonetically and I still missed it. I apologize because that's something okay. I have to work on. Cristie Kamiya and Ismail Hijiri. Okay, thumbs up. And I just want everyone to know, I really, really, really want to thank Dr. Izzy, as he also is known, for logging on to today's show. He is literally on the other side of the world. And so we may also experience just a little bit of lag time in terms of responses. So we want to make sure that we have some times where we're making sure that that space is there for that message to get all the way over
Thank
there.
You.
So great. So our first order of business on the show is I always ask my guests to tell us a little bit about themselves. And so Amber, why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners and viewers?
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. My name is Amber Labelle. My pronouns are she and hers. And before I introduce myself, I think the most important thing that people need to know about me in the audience is that I'm a huge fan of this podcast. And this is like such a fangirl moment to get to be here and be part of this experience. It's really, truly an honor to be part of Dr. Greenhill's podcast. And for anybody who hasn't had the chance to really dig into Dr. Greenhill's scholarship, I'm working on a project where I've had the opportunity to read some of her writings. And when she says she's been in the profession for a minute, she really means it. And the things that she's been telling us for 15 years are still true. So if you have a minute to get into PubMed and put in LM Greenhill and get into some of her work, I'd really highly recommend that. I am a veterinary ophthalmologist. I live in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. I own my own practice. I am owned by 2 pugs. And most of my life revolves around not just my 4-legged pug children, but also my 2-legged children as well. And it is an honor to be here today.
Thank you. I love that you put the pugs first, though.
Always.
And also, Amber, thank you so much for the very kind words. Very kind. Thank you. Cristie, tell us about yourself.
Hi. So I'm a veterinarian. But I don't do clinical veterinary work. I work in the nonprofit shelter space and in executive leadership. So my days are mostly on Zoom. Pronouns she, her, hers. And yeah, what else? I have a pack of little dogs in my house.
We love the little dogs. We love the little dogs. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Izzy.
Oh, I'd like to echo Amber's comments about about being grateful to be on this podcast and to be part of this discussion. It's really an honor to be here. I am what I like to call a non-traditional veterinarian. So I do practice mostly in the clinical space, but I do a lot of work with wildlife and conservation, and currently in a research space, which is what has brought me to Africa. I'm currently in the Congo at the moment. So I work with chimpanzees. I work with wildlife rescue centers around the world. I am based in Toronto. So at home, I do work in private practice, in the ER, in GP clinics, and also have my own mobile practice for rescued animals in sanctuaries and wildlife.
So there's like 1 billion students out there who probably want to contact you. You've outlined
Anytime.
like the job that we all hear students say that they want, right? So
yeah, the inbox is always open, and I'm always happy to encourage people to take whatever path they're passionate about. So
awesome. Thank you all for joining me today. So Amber, today's conversation actually started with you. For folks watching and listening, we've been stalking each other on social media for a long time. And every now and again, we chit chat and in the DMs because, Twitter and hashtag Twitter and X or whatever it's called now. And, a few months ago, you reached out. So, why'd you pitch this show? Why'd you pitch this topic?
So I'm going to tell you a 2-part story about why I pitched this to you. And one part of it is going to be a personal story, and one part of it is going to be a systemic story. And I hope that that's a theme that runs through our whole discussion today about where the intersections of the individual and where the systemic are. So my personal story, and woo, man, like I do a lot of public speaking, y'all, like a lot. Like I'm very comfortable listening to the sound of my own voice, but it's a real different thing to sit in an audience of your peers and be like, yep, I'm an addict. Like I have an addiction problem. I have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, and being able to admit that in public, I'm not going to lie, there's a little tachycardia going on right here at this particular moment. I've known I've had an unhealthy relationship with alcohol for years at this point. And it was in October of 2023 that I was in a position emotionally and also in terms of my community support where I was ready to choose sobriety, where I was ready to make alcohol not part of my life anymore. And that was a really big really hard decision and action. And I feel unbelievably grateful that I had the community support, that I had the family support, and that I was able to make that change in my life. And I have been living a sober life since October of last year. I hope that we do get the chance to talk about like what sobriety means, because sobriety looks different for different people. So certainly the version of sobriety that I've chosen might not be the sobriety somebody else has chosen. But I'm really proud of the fact that I've made alcohol not a central coping mechanism in my life. And so that's my personal story. And then in early January of this year, I was laying around recovering from COVID. And I was pretty bored sitting on the couch trying to get over this nasty virus. And I started thinking, there are people out there like me. There are people out there who struggle with addiction, who struggle with their relationship with alcohol, with other substances. Where are those people, and why don't we talk about this? Because I can't be the only one. I know it can't just be me. And so I started a Facebook group called Sober Vets. And that Facebook group has nearly 300 veterinarians in it now. I'm not the only one. There are a lot of us out there, and we need each other. And this is where we start to get into the systemic stuff, right? So part of why I pitched this podcast to you, Lisa, is because I'm white, I'm married, I'm affluent. I live in this big, gorgeous house. I have stable housing. I don't have any student debt. I own my own practice. I have a lot of privilege protecting me and being able to talk about addiction. I'm not worried that child services are going to come take my kids away. I'm not worried that my boss is going to fire me because of my relationship with alcohol. And because I have so many protective factors around me, I feel an obligation to be brave and to share not just my experience, but also to make space for the fact that it can be really hard to have these conversations. But until we start making the space, until we start making it truly safe, and when I say truly safe, I mean enable people to be free from repercussions like job loss or child loss or housing loss, we're not going to make inroads into helping people live free of addiction. So that's how come I pitched this to you, and I'm really, really grateful that you picked up the pitch. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Greenhill.
Thank you. Thank you. And, I'm so, I know we'll really get into this, but these issues around kind of the social protective factors really do make this, not just kind of the lived experience, but the social protective factors also do make this a big DEI issue. We do know that folks who are lower income, folks who don't have some of that social capital, folks of color, folks, all of these different things are at greater risk for some very tangible repercussions that then kind of potentially spiral, right? To make a bad situation potentially worse, rather than really kind of thinking about how do we help people. And this is often a challenge, I think, in this particular space around and dealing with substance abuse, this issue of recovery and rehabilitation versus punitive issues, not recognizing that fundamentally these are medical issues, right? These are medical issues, and we don't like to always think of them that way, but these are medical issues. So, there are, like I mentioned at the top of the show, a few articles, but there are very few. It seems like maybe almost 10 years ago or so, this was an issue that got a little bit more attention in the profession. But, in an era where there is so much popular discussion kind of things like opioid abuse in particular, for any of you, why do you think vet med isn't talking as much about this, particularly even in the well-being space? We talk about well-being, but we don't talk about this particular issue in that larger context. Cristie, Izzy?
I think there's a lot of stigma, a lot of shame around the topic, especially if you're the one going through it.
Yeah.
So, Amber, kudos for your super hard start of this journey, and thank you for being brave and for forming the group. And that is where I also joined that Sober Vets group a couple months ago. So my journey has been a little bit different, and and similar to you, Amber, I do a lot of public speaking and lecturing and presentations, and I am never this nervous, and yeah, there's a little bit of tachycardia going on as well. So I also think about the incredible privilege that I experienced in getting sober. So I have been sober for about 20 years, a little bit over 20 years, and I got sober during veterinary school. I started veterinary school in 1999 and finished in 2005. I didn't even know I had a problem with alcohol, but how it manifested was I failed a class, or I failed an exam, which would have resulted in failing a class. And this was my first year in veterinary school. And I was sent to the academic or student affairs or whatever office that is, I can't remember. And I was subsequently sent to a counselor. There was a counselor / therapist embedded in the veterinary school, and so I had to go and talk to her. I showed up late for my appointment, my very first appointment. I remember that. It was Saturday morning. I was hungover. I'd lost my car the night before, and so I was late because I had to figure out how to get to my appointment that morning. I think I ended up riding my scooter or something, or my bike. I don't know. And after several sessions, she fired me, and she said, "You need to go see someone else." And I guess I was not very nice or belligerent, and as we often are under when we're drinking. And so I'm like, I agreed. I'm like, okay, and was sent to the main campus. And it was an alcohol counselor. And I was like, what the hell am I doing here? Like, what is this? Yeah, it was like what? Like I don't have a problem with this, and then and that sort of started the journey. I was incredibly fortunate that I was able to sit a year out, come back and repeat the class. But then I did it again the following year. But this time I was already into the recovery process, and it was very early on, and I had forgotten to do a project, or I'd forgotten to do an exam or something like that, where I forgot something and failed again, essentially. So and that was rough. It's like I'm trying to do everything right. This was I'm trying to get sober, and I'm doing everything that they're telling me to do, but I just got kicked out of vet school again for the second time. And luckily, and I'm so incredibly fortunate for this, where I was given the opportunity to sit this year out. Because one of the things that I remember being told was, you don't get to vet school because you're not smart, or because you can't do this, and there's usually some other thing. There's something else going on, or there's something else is wrong for you to be experiencing this and going through all of this, and so I stuck to that there's something wrong. Like what's wrong with me? Like what is it that's wrong? I was able to come back, and I had to plead my case before a committee of students and faculty and whatnot, and luckily they let me back. I have no idea how, because I was actually planning my plan B, which was I was actually going to go commit suicide, if because I had no plan B. There was no plan B. It was either vet school or be dead. So I was able to come back, and what I've just recently found out is all the experiences and everything I was that happened during vet school, but not just vet school. During vet school before that, and even as a child, was undiagnosed ADHD. And so in this path of sobriety and in this path of growing and everything, I mean, that is where I'm at now, learning how to navigate this whole thing. Having gone through decades of what is wrong with me. There's clearly something wrong with me. I just don't know what it is. So, I mean, it is a learning process. Even 20 years later, it is a learning process. And yeah, I'm just really grateful to be here and to have this opportunity to talk about it. This is the very first time I'm ever saying any of this out loud. Most of my friends, none of my colleagues actually know that I'm an alcoholic. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for choosing this space to share. And I just want you to know that, like, I want all of you to know this is hard stuff to talk about. And it does require a level of bravery and courageousness that you know, is hard. And so yeah, you did that. Like, in a good way, like, you know, like the pop culture way, right? You did that. Like, and so thank you for sharing. And also shout out to all of those folks that saw that light in you and gave you the much needed chance to try again. I think that's something. There's a lesson in just that for all of us, right? And so yeah, thank you for that. So
yeah, thank you to both of you for sharing your bravery and your courage with all of us. I mean, it's such an inspiring story to hear from both of you, and what you've had to overcome and what you've overcome, and to think about those small moments that changed your whole life, of somebody supporting you, or somebody believing in you, or you believing in yourself, and knowing that you could do that. I think that's such a valuable lesson for everybody to learn, and to be able to talk about it now. You know, after how many years you're here and you're sharing your story with the world. I mean, that's so special and so needed. And I think addresses Lisa's original question, which was, you know, why is nobody talking about this, you know, at this level? And I think you said it, that there's a lot of stigma and there's a lot of shame associated with it. There's also a lot of privacy surrounding some of these situations. So what I've seen, I mean, we were told in vet school that, you know, you will know people that die of suicide, and that's just a statistic, and that's a fact in this profession. And, you know, you hear it, but you don't really believe it until, you know, two people who went to school with me, we lost them to suicide, and then it became real. And I worked with one of them and saw the mental health that you know, crisis that she was going through, and how nobody could help her, and the pressure of the job was so large. But what you hear when these things happen is condolences for people with very big circumstances. You know, there's this group, Not One More Vet, which was created to support you know, this community, but we never talk about what actually happened, and, you know, what were they going through? How could we have helped them and all these sorts of things. So we express condolences and support, but it's all niceties and not getting down to the real nitty-gritty of like, what are the root problems in this profession? And I think we don't want to think about our friends and our colleagues and responsible professionals misusing access to controlled substances, or going through things that are typically kept quiet in society, even though we talk about all this mental health and all this wellness. So I think we need to really shift the focus from the topic of wellness and support to the drivers of why people are experiencing these feelings in the first place, and what they can do to prevent them, and what they can do to deal with them when they arise, and make that an accessible space to talk about, where they're not going to be afraid of losing their jobs, or they're not going to be afraid of being judged by their colleagues and that sort of thing. So I think this is a huge step in that, bringing this topic to such a major platform, and for you guys to have shared your stories in such a personal and deep way. I'm sure there are so many people out there who are experiencing the same, or have experienced the same, or might experience the same in the future. And if they see this, that might be something that gives them some hope for themselves.
Yes. Yes, 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 yes. It's interesting because we don't, to Amber's kind of opening comments, we don't talk a lot about the systemic stuff, right? I remember Dr. Elizabeth Strand gave at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, gave a keynote at a well-being symposium I was at a number of years ago. And, she talked about how 80% of a lot of these kind of well-being stressors for within the profession are, I'll be blunt, because of trash environments, trash management, trash environments, trash. And then we spent the next 3 days talking about personal mental health things that just kind of pathologize this, like, oh, you need to learn how to survive in a toxic environment. I'm like, no, how about we change the toxic environment so that we don't have to develop unhealthy, skills to survive in places where we probably shouldn't be. Right. And so we keep coming back to this issue within that well-being space. So according to the AVMA, about 11 to 13% of veterinarians have experience with some type of substance abuse issue. And it is slightly higher than other health professions. Before anybody goes to put that on social media, like we don't have to do it like suicide, like have more suicide than, though this is not a competition. But it is slightly higher than some other health providers. But it is also, similar to some of the larger kind of mental health and behavioral outcomes. How do you see some of the discussions that we're having or not having around well-being impacting this particular issue? I mean, is it kind of talked about the fact that we're talking so much about well-being, but we're not kind of delving in. I mean, it's like we talk about well-being and then we go almost immediately to suicide versus, this large continuum of stuff we're wrestling with. So any thoughts about, how you see some of these discussions? What could and should we be talking about related to substance issues within the profession?
I think one thing that we definitely don't talk about, and Izzy, I'm really interested in kind of getting some of your experience with this, is the ubiquity of alcohol as a coping mechanism within the profession, and the ubiquity of alcohol as culture. So every major conference has happy hours. Every major veterinary organization that's looking to get people together at conferences has happy hours and this like really alcohol-centric culture. Like I remember when I was in veterinary school as first and second years, every Friday night we had a keg out front the vet school on the lawn. And I don't know, maybe they don't do that anymore. But, it was this very alcohol-centric culture. And a little bit to speak back to your point about how does this all tie in with DEI related stuff, Lisa? we're really excluding a lot of people when we put so much of our professional community and culture into alcohol-centric spaces. Because, I mean, Izzy, maybe you want to speak a little bit to who do we leave out when we make alcohol the focus of community spaces in the profession?
Yeah, and that's actually something I was just gonna speak on. So thank you for highlighting that. You both shared your story, and so I'll share my story, which is from, a very different background. I grew up in a fairly liberal Muslim household, and we actually had a strict ban on alcohol in the house ever since I was a kid until we were adults who went to university. I remember my mom always talking about her father, my grandfather, who was an alcoholic that she always had to clean up after and how it affected her forever. And she never wanted us to experience that in our lives. And I took this, my personal values and my faith to heart, and almost never succumbed to peer pressure in this regard. But as I grew up, I learned that actually most of my family members did consume alcohol recreationally, and that was their social way of integrating into Western culture, as we were, first generation immigrants, and except my mother and grandmother and myself. So I would want to spend time with my family, party with my cousins when they were in town and this sort of thing. And I always felt like the odd one out because everyone got sloppy drunk, going out to bars and doing what people do in Western society. And it just made my heart sink that this was the only way that I could connect with my family, was through alcohol-centric spaces, right? Um, in university, I went through some phases of depression. A lot of that was related to coming out as gay, and also dealing with, relationship desires and this sort of thing in a space where I also, again, felt like a minority. Although being, male and having that privilege, I've dealt with a lot of minority stress in my life as well. And for a moment, I did turn to alcohol to see what it was all about, right? Everyone else was doing it. And if I was going to do it, I might as well get drunk because that's what people experience. So that's what I should experience, right? Um, and I thought that was the moment to try it because I was in a funk and I was like, hey, well, people say this makes you feel better. So maybe that's, maybe there's something there. Um, and I got blackout drunk a few times. On one occasion, I ended up in a car with some very questionable people and almost missed my flight home. And after several instances of, negative spaces for who I knew I was as a person, I decided it wasn't for me. I wanted to enjoy the moments for what they were. I wanted to feel all the emotions myself, to be in control of my senses, but to be able to let go on my own terms and to remember having good times and not forget what happened and be like, oh, I had so much fun, but I don't even remember what happened. And going through vet school, like you mentioned, everything was centered around alcohol. I mean, I went to vet school in Guelph in Canada. It's a university town. Most university towns are, fueled by energy from the students, and that's students going out to bars every weekend. We had a veterinary fraternity who, part of the joining fee was, yeah, you get access to like, past tests and study notes and stuff. Oh, but you get free alcohol at every party. And I was like, well, why am I going to pay for that? Why is that the central tenet of this community? And so for me, it's more about being somebody who comes from a background of immigrants, a background of, people of color, a background of a community that really sobriety is the standard. If we're talking about our original community, and being in a Canadian context, alcohol is sort of the glue that binds social activities together. People ask, oh, well, what do you do if you don't drink? As though drinking itself is an activity. I can drink another drink and be in a social space with you. And going to vet school where it was very white and very, agricultural and these sorts of things. Again, I think I was one of 7 ethnic people in my class. And so these things just start to weigh on you in terms of like, how do you adapt in this society and, you know, meet your colleagues and meet your friends when their spaces are all around alcohol and yours aren't. And then tying that into the veterinary profession, um, it yeah, it's difficult because you want to fit in with people whose everyday normal social activities are not your everyday social normal activities and not things that make you happy. And when you go to these spaces, really it's like, you know, if I find a sober space, for example, like something to do with wellness or you know, some activity that's like hiking or whatever, like my heart just lights up because I'm like, these are my people, you know, like you find your tribe in that. But I think what we are neglecting outside of all of that is that um, access to alcohol, as Amber said, is ubiquitous. And these articles that we mention, it's always about substance abuse. Like, oh yeah, veterinarians have access to opioids, you know, have access to drugs that can cause suicide and whatever. But everyone is using alcohol. And we don't know the extent to which everyone is using alcohol to cope with their problems. And they might not even know when it's a problem until something major happens to them. And so the question then becomes, how can we deal with this mental health problem that we have when on one hand you're, you know, doing all these wellness activities and on the other hand you're going out to bars to socialize with your friends and getting sloppy drunk. The other thing that I've seen, especially in the LGBTQ space, and I'm not sure if it's the same in other spaces, but is access to party drugs. They're becoming way, way, way more common than I've ever seen in my life. And almost every one of my friends and colleagues is using them. And so you go out on a Friday night, and it's no longer about alcohol, it's about ketamine and all sorts of other substances that, you know, can have much more damaging effects when combined and when you don't know the legitimate source as well. So, you know, everyone's going through their own struggle. Everyone might come from different backgrounds and feel different stresses. And the issue now is that it's so easy for them to turn to these things that can be very short-term coping mechanisms that lead to a much longer problem later. And we may not even see the effects of this problem for a generation to come, you know, as the long-term effects kind of play out in their lives. So I think that normalizing sobriety and sober spaces, or at least alcohol-free spaces in our community as ways to engage with each other is so, so important because one, we're being inclusive of people who don't fall into those spaces. And two, we're creating a way for other people to find out what can make their, you know, inner beings happy in social spaces without having to depend on these, right? So
Yeah. Oh, Izzy, you dropped so many gems. So let me see if I can run back a couple of them back here, right? Let me see if I can run a couple of them back. One, you know, there is this very, very heavy social lubrication piece, right? And I mean, seriously, my colleague on the other side of the wall, we had a touch base between meetings very briefly just before this, and he was like, "Hey, free for a drink after work?" Boom, there we go, right? It's so, oh, sure, yeah, we could do that, right? I was more concerned about the snackies that went with the drink than the drink itself, but that's a whole other thing, right? But you know, yes, this idea of you know, social lubrication. The other piece is that the party drugs piece, right? I think that this is an issue. It is an issue for a lot of folks. A lot of folks, for some types of substance abuse, are just weekend users until they're not, right? And we also know that there is a huge issue with young people who haven't necessarily gotten to vet school yet with these types of behaviors. I'll tell you, and I'm like, I'm sure my daughter will listen to or watch this later and be like, I can't believe you said that on the pod, but oh well. Like, but I mean, you know, last year we had a situation where I was traveling, she had a friend over, they took the dog's medication, like they stole it. I mean, it was Prozac, but she didn't know that. Like, I can guarantee you she didn't know that. But I was like, 11 pills are missing. Who took Barkley's medication, right? And so there are some folks out here that are just taking anything that they can get their hands on, and that's at least that was from the CVS, Izzy. It wasn't from 14th or whatever it was, right? Cut with God knows what. It was just Prozac. But these are very real things, and the fact that we create social opportunities within our professional meetings and spaces and all of those things. It's so easy for folks to go, oh, well, they can drink club soda, or they cannot be in a space where everybody is having, a drink. And then one last piece, Izzy, that, as you were talking, brought to mind a study that I did back in, I guess, probably around 2013, 2012 with some other colleagues, where we were exploring the experiences of LGBTQ students in veterinary school, and the number of queer students who said that they avoid study groups, that they don't go out with their student colleagues on the weekends, that they don't socialize, that they're very isolated because you go to the study group and maybe everybody goes to grab a beer afterwards. They were like, yeah, one time too many people said some things and got a little sloppy and got really, really messy with the homophobia after a couple of beers. And I know that that's not a safe space for me anymore, right? So it's not just about whether or not folks are comfortable in terms of their sobriety or recovery or whatever that state might be, but that it is the behaviors that may come along with substance use that make it unsafe socially for other people. So thank you so much for telling not only your story as well, but dropping all those gems. So one, Amber, you mentioned at the top of the show, and I'm gonna maybe ask Cristie to weigh in on this, but so what does the continuum of sobriety kind of look like?
Actually, Lisa, that's a super good question, but can I hard detour your question for just one quick second?
Sure.
But it's gonna come all the way back.
It's gonna come
around.
back. I believe you.
Yeah, it's gonna be a winding road.
I believe you.
Cristie, my heart rate is slightly down now. Is your heart rate slightly down now too?
My heart rate has gone down too.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool. I'm glad that we are returning to some sort of normal sinus rhythm here. No one's getting intubated here. There are no pugs in this situation. One of the things that I heard you say is that you were diagnosed with ADHD, and Lisa knows this about me, that I was recently diagnosed with ADHD. And Lisa, I'm happy to tell you that I've updated the term neurospicy to the new term neurosparkly.
Ooh.
I know, isn't that nice?
I like
isn't that nice? Neurosparkly.
I like neurosparkly.
There's so many ways that we can talk about all the different ways our brains can be. So Cristie, before you sort of speak to the ways that sobriety shows up in different people's lives, I just want to make sure we didn't lose this point, that another piece around this inclusivity piece is now that we're getting more and more language for talking about the neurodiversity of people's brains and the neurosparkliness that seems to maybe be overrepresented in our profession. There's something about the way us neurosparkly people are wired that we seem to end up doing this job. That when we talk about what sobriety looks like, there's a lot of overlap with understanding neurotype and how sobriety impacts and how addiction impacts neurotype too. And I was just as a newbie in the ADHD space, I want to learn from you on that.
So I was diagnosed with ADHD about 3 years ago, and that, as you go through the entire cycle of emotions. I was relieved because I'd gone almost my entire life knowing that there was something wrong with me, just not knowing what it was. And so now there was an answer for all the stupid crap I've done in the past, or all the poor choices, or whatever. And then I was angry. I was so pissed. Like, why didn't anyone pick this up sooner? I even in veterinary school, or even in like elementary school or high school, where it would have been well, I don't want to say it was easier, but there would have been so much less heartache through all of this. But at the same time, I am grateful for my experiences, and so getting back to the the coping and the recovery piece, like I do remember, I do believe that the ADHD, undiagnosed ADHD, what had a huge component in the alcoholism, because I do remember thinking and saying, and like I just wanted, I just want to rest. I just want to sleep. I just want things to quiet down. And that was, I think, the reason for drinking. I started drinking when I was 14 years old in high school, and kind of drank through most of my teens and 20s. But that's what I was looking for. I was looking for some like quiet in my head. And not understanding this part, the neurodiversity part, but also having so much shame and the stigma associated with going to AA meetings or getting help, or all of these things. I actually stopped going to AA meetings when I moved to California about 12, 13 years ago now, because I was starting a new career. I'm going to start a new life. No one knows me there. No one's going to know my past. And so I think looking back on the way that I've coped, my job was my coping mechanism. And even prior to that, each new job or each new relationship was the coping mechanism. It was a new hyper focus to that's what you did, and nothing else matters when you're hyper focusing on something. And so I've been here in this position for 13 years or so, and with this during the pandemic, whatever masking, whatever coping, whatever everything just kind of unraveled, and totally whatever I was doing wasn't working anymore. And so really focusing on well, what is it that I need, or what is it that I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm still learning how to figure all this out. I mean, I think I've had to gone backwards of even learning how to acknowledge feelings and acknowledge or identify feelings, and not do things because I should be doing something or I should be feeling a certain way, but actually allowing myself to feel all of it. And that's really, really hard.
Oh my God, isn't it so annoying? Feeling your feelings is
yes.
It's so much work to feel your feelings and be a human. I totally get that.
Mm-hmm.
I very much enjoyed the complete oblivion that came with drinking. Yeah. But then it really sucked probably even more once you came back.
Yeah.
It's a journey.
I would like to jump in and just comment on the point you brought up about hyper focusedness, and how we deal with that in our profession. I can speak best to clinical practice, general practice, for companion animals, and I think in this space, we work long hours, we overwork, we pull a lot of overtime, and a lot of it is because we're compassionate people and we care about our jobs. That's why we went into this in the first place. I mean, I don't think anybody went into the veterinary field to make money. And so when the job is the source of the stress, or as Lisa said, the environment is the source of the mental stress, we're trained, and I felt this myself, even though I'm interested in so many different things, we're trained to do one thing and one thing only. And so it's like people don't know how to live outside of veterinary medicine, because to get into vet school, you have to be trying to get into vet school for at least 4 years. And then once you get in, you're taught to be one thing and only have an identity. And it's like when people ask, oh, what do you do? And the only answer you give them is your career or your profession. Like, you're so much more than that, than your profession. And so what I find is that we get lost in that, and so many of my colleagues, and I've been guilty of the same, is we use work as that coping mechanism. It's like it's the source of the stress, but it's the only thing we know how to do. So by diving deeper into it, we get more and more distracted and we don't deal with our feelings. And then it's this like compound cycle of like, instead of maybe using alcohol, you're using your work to try and avoid it. And the problems only get worse until you burn out. And so I've seen many colleagues burn out, much of it due to the environments that are cultivated in our workspaces. And we all know we deal with emotional pressures every day, whether it's compassion fatigue, the patients and animal friends that you couldn't save despite going to the ends of the earth to try for them, the pet parents you let down in the process, the abuse from clients, the lack of understanding from friends. None of our friends really know what we go through in our profession unless they're part of it. And so as much as you want to share with them, they can't really feel or see what you see unless they see your everyday life. So it's easy to like use these mechanisms, whether it's alcohol or substances, or trying to hyper focus on something to not have to deal with everything else. So I think that was a really valuable thing that you brought up, and that we need to learn how to prevent from happening in our environments, or cultivate environments that don't foster that.
Thank you for bringing that up. I think one of the biggest lessons for me, one of the biggest things that I learned through all of this, is that I'm not defined by my profession. Being a veterinarian is just one small part of my life, and it is not a priority. It is a job. Yeah, it's my career. But it's not my biggest priority in my life. And that was a hard one, but necessary to survive.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering why Izzy has not been asked to be a keynote at a well-being conference.
Right.
But it's okay. There's still time.
Don't be calling me out there.
Because I mean, I think that, again, my dissertation in way back when was about veterinary leaders and personal values. And the number one personal value had to do with the identity, professional identity. Like, it scored off the, like, just that was being a veterinarian was the most important thing. Now, I know that I was studying them in the context of being a veterinary leader, but still I was like, really? Interesting. This is kind of fascinating to me. There had only been one other group that I'd seen like that, and that was nurses. And there are a lot of kind of things that are similar about the two in terms of some value pieces, but this identity of what it means to be a veterinarian. And you're right, like we select for it, we groom it. We, for folks that aren't in clinical practice, I was at a meeting one time and somebody was like, oh, well, they mentioned someone and it was like, yeah, that person isn't a veterinarian anymore. And I'm sitting there like, as a non-veterinarian going, y'all just picking people out. Like, you got, $1,000 in a DVM and y'all just put them out on the street. And it was just really fascinating to me But I think that the other thing that we have to be mindful of, and while we're talking about substance, and while the lived experiences of my guests today tend to be specifically around alcohol, let's not act like the shopping bags that are in the back of your Subaru are not a problem. Let's not act like that Shein addiction, that Temu addiction, like, right? Or whatever it is, right, that you may have fallen into. These are all kind of the same types of behaviors, right? The house that might be, a little bit filled with stuff, right? Like these are all similar issues. Like the underpinnings of them tend to be very similar. And I think that we have to kind of make space for these conversations and also create those spaces where folks feel safe and welcome and not, like, oh, I'm walking into the den of iniquity and temptation just to go hang out at a meeting with my colleagues. So Amber, what does sobriety look like for you?
So sobriety for me looked like complete abstaining from alcohol for a solid 3 months. And then a kind of like testing of the waters, like, can I have a glass of wine? And what does that look like? And what does that feel like? One of the things that was a really big barrier for me at the beginning was these ideas of like always and never, that I would never have a drink again. And that was a really big mental hurdle for me to kind of like get over. And I think the thing that a lot of us veterinary professionals have in common is we're real smart people. And we're real good at thinking our way in circles around things. And we're really good at thinking our way into excuses around things. Or maybe that's just me. That could just be just me. But trying to like really come to a place where you're like, yeah, actually, not only do I not need this, I don't want this. And also knowing that sobriety, it's like that great Mary Oliver poem. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees through the desert. And shout out to my sister here who loves Mary Oliver. But like, you do not have to be good. You can make mistakes and you can get up the next day and you can make a different choice and you can make a better choice. And that there are a lot of ways to achieve sobriety. I think a barrier for me at the beginning was this idea that if I wanted to get sober, that I was going to have to go to AA 7 days a week and I was going to have to walk on my knees through broken glass and it was going to be miserable and it was going to be awful and it was going to be torture. And I don't doubt that that is some people's experience, but it's not the only way out there. There are all kinds of programs. There are all kinds of supports. There are medications now that are designed to help your brain break the cycles of addiction. Like what we're learning about addiction medicine now and the science we have around this is really phenomenal. So like if there's anybody out there who's like, you know what, maybe this is me and I want to do something different. Like there's a lot of ways to get sober and there are a lot of ways to get help. And it doesn't always have to look like going to AA. Although if you're going to AA and that works for you, that is totally awesome. But there are so many pathways and there are so many kinds of support. And when you're ready, there are people waiting there with open hands and open hearts and open arms, and they're ready for you. There's a whole community of people out there ready for you. We're ready. We're ready for you right now.
Right now. Yes.
Right now.
So just a couple of questions left as we wrap up. So, what things can and should the profession, and by the organized veterinary medicine, what can we do to actually be better, right? Be more supportive, to have better spaces, to do all the things that are needed to support this community. For example, that 300, which I think you're probably going to have more folks knocking on your door soon. But what are the things that we can and should be doing? AAVMC has a meeting in Like a month, less than a month? What should we do besides the giant
Um,
reception that we're having, ticket that we're handing out at the
I'm
door?
just gonna, I'm gonna,
Yeah, go ahead, Izzy.
I'm gonna circle back to this topic about identity because I think it's really important in how we can change our space as a profession. What I've noticed is that most veterinarians that I've encountered have known that they wanted to do this for a very long time, whether it was from when they were 5 years old or 14 years old or whatever. They usually need to volunteer with other vets to apply to vet school and get a sense of what the profession is and all that sort of stuff. And despite everything that they need to go through and all the sacrifices that we need to make to actually get in and make this something that can happen, and some people it takes 2, 3, 4 tries before they get in, they go through all this personal sacrifice, they get out the other side, and within 1, maybe 2 years, maybe 5 years, they absolutely hate the profession. But they feel trapped because they don't know another identity since they were 14 years old or more. And they would maybe want to leave the profession, but don't know how or don't know what else they can do or who they are. And maybe turning to substances is part of that story in terms of how they cope. But I guess my question is, why is it that today people who enter the profession end up hating it so quickly and end up wanting to leave, like a majority of it? And in the past, we hear this about like old timer vets who, oh yeah, we just used to like buckle up our boots and work 57 hours in 3 days and do what
Yeah.
needed to be done. And it's like that expectation is there for today's society, which is much different than the society that maybe existed at that time. Um, and a lot of it comes to work-life balance and support in the workplace and healthy management and that sort of thing. But I think one of the biggest issues is that as a profession, there's no real oversight. So like every clinic, for example, is privately owned and managed or corporately owned and managed or whatever the space is becoming now. And so if you work for a private entity, there's nobody there to protect you if your boss demands that you work to these conditions. And that might be the only clinic in your community. Maybe you're financially in need of paying off the massive debt you had from vet school or something like that. So you might not feel like you have a choice. When it comes to the corporate side, there are all these other issues associated with the demands that they make of veterinarians and production that they have to meet, or all these sorts of things. So I guess the question is, how do we shift those spaces so that it is what we imagined it was when we were young and idealistic, rather than, oh, this is the real world, this really sucks, and to foster those positive environments. But if everything is so decentralized, then how do we protect those people in those situations where there is no real oversight for their mental health?
Yeah. So my reaction to that is an openness to change, which is not necessarily something I see a lot of. but I mean, at least, certainly more than a decade ago when I did my research, the profession is very traditional. It has a very iconic kind of ideology around what it is and what it can and should be. And the world is rapidly swirling around it. And oftentimes we still see it like, I am still holding on to the flagpole in the middle of the hurricane, right? And so, I do think that certainly in some parts of the profession, I see a lot of willingness to change and be dynamic and thinking very outside of the box. But oftentimes, I think that even when the profession is like, we're going to do something different and we're thinking outside of the box, it is like, here is the box. And they went 1 centimeter outside of the box. And it's like, wow, We did
Fill a
that.
tiny box, real tiny box.
Fill a box, and from a distance, if you squint, you can see like, the improvement.
This is where our neural sparkliness comes in.
Yeah.
Well, because of it, I don't do well in clinical practice. One of the reasons I don't do clinical work is because I just can't. It's not compatible with my brain. But I am in a leadership position in a very large organization. We have over 100 staff here. But one of the things I can do is change, at least for what we have here, and trying to capture the reasons why I went to veterinary school in the first place, and creating an environment here for our 6 to 8 veterinarians to be in a place where they want to be and they're able to do really good, high quality work and have that satisfaction afterwards, and just be completely engaged and loved our job, which is the main thing.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, most people in the world work because we have to, for financial reasons or what have you. We are fairly lucky in the veterinary space that most of us chose this because of passion, and obviously it takes a significant financial commitment to go through. And so I think what I'm trying to say is we're lucky to be one of the few professions in the world where you have the opportunity to wake up and say, I love what today is going to bring, rather than, oh, I have to go to work. Like, it doesn't have to be work. It can be passion and it can be joy. And we're lucky to have access to that, but we need to cultivate it.
Yeah, totally.
All right. So that question was gone. So one thing each of you that we can all do and organize veterinary medicine, because the people want to know, what is that thing for each of you that would make meetings safer for everyone?
I want to go last, please.
So so something that's like tangible and doable and actionable. I did attend a conference in the animal welfare space recently, where they actually had AA meeting as part of an option for the activities, which is super cool. It's super early in the morning, and they didn't call it AA meeting. I think it was Friends of Bell or something like that, where it wasn't advertising that, hey, we have an AA meeting here. But I thought that was really cool. I mean, it was super early in the morning, and there weren't very many people who attended, but for the people who wanted to or needed to, it was there. I thought that was really cool. That was the first time I'd seen that.
That's great. Awesome. Thank you for that recommendation. Izzy.
I maybe have a couple of things. One would be to normalize non-alcoholic spaces in these gatherings, in these spaces. I actually made an observation in the past year, because I do go out to bars and things with friends, and I've seen that, and also on social media, but I've seen that non-alcoholic beverages are starting to take up significant space in the beverage sector. And these are things like mocktails in cans, and things you can bring to a party to drink if you don't drink alcohol, 0 proof, whatever. And even in a grocery store, I've seen like a whole section full of non-alcoholic beers and wines and things like that. So certainly I think that society is moving that way. I've also seen like several of my friends on social media post about becoming sober. So there's some sort of movement or trend happening in the socioeconomic space that is making this scene more popular. And so in these spaces, rather than, even as simple as when somebody gets on a mic and speaks about, oh yeah, we're all, gonna have a drink afterwards and celebrate, just to think about the inclusivity of people who might feel a bit left out by that statement, because it's just a presumption that everyone does what you do, and making space for that group of people whether it's through events or what you provide to people, or whether it's from comments about, these spaces and activities and stuff like that. And then the other thing that I was gonna comment was just about teaching new people who are entering into this space about what the real problems are and how to potentially cope with that. So perhaps even a course that could be mandatory in all vet schools about mental health and how to address your own mental health, because we learn about pharmacology and pathophysiology and all these necessary things. In our school, we had the fortune of having a course called the Art of Veterinary Medicine, which encompassed a lot of things. But I think within that, there are two things we never really learned about. One was, business acumen, which I think can help a lot of people in our world. But the other was mental health, and I know it's talked about now in vet schools, but to actually like foster that tool in the toolkit for students who are entering this profession, and that can be through conferences, that can be through coursework in schools and through workshops and stuff like that, but really teaching them how to do the work for themselves to navigate what can be a psychologically demanding profession that they're going to face for the rest of their lives, so that when they have these pressures, they may be able to have that confidence in themselves to get through it, rather than turn towards things that they may not want to. But
thank you for that. Amber.
Anywhere you're having a meeting, there's an organization, and anywhere there's an organization, there's power. And anytime you've got power, you need to interrogate that power. You need to be asking the questions: what are we doing to interrupt the pathways that take people to addiction? How are we using our power to ensure people have access to healthcare? They have access to mental health care. They have access to stable housing. They have access to childcare. They have access to food and to water. What are we doing to ensure that we are using our power to make systemic changes that interrupt the patterns that lead to addiction?
Woo. Yes. Yes.
That's everything.
That's everything.
Awesome.
And now, I want that to be the mic drop, but we got an amazing question from the chat. And so the chat, as a new clinic owner, I want to make sure that I have resources to support to make it the best place to work for my employees. Is there a central listing somewhere? Might need a little bit more information, Dr. Sherburne.
There should be, but to the best of my knowledge, there's not that kind of resource available. But my goodness, that does seem something that should be available in a central location, available to everyone.
Well, and one thing I can say is that, as the owner, you've got power. And to Amber's most notable point here, it's opportunity to question that and see, look at what you are able to offer, but also plugging into maybe some local organizations for additional resources. So one, as soon as I end this show, I'll be chatting with our meeting folks, can we make sure that we have mocktails available? Yes, for our meeting. But also, I want to just thank each of you for being on the show. This has been such a rich conversation, and I could totally go on for another hour easily, because I think that we've only scratched the surface. But definitely make sure that there are things that we're all doing, especially in organized veterinary medicine, as we're hosting events, as we're planning events, that we make sure that we plan spaces for folks. Not everyone is in the same emotional space, the same, we have different needs. And while we are there for a common goal of, whatever CE and meetings and catching up and all of those things, it's really critical for us to remember that this is a space that should be inclusive. The other thing, and I would be remiss to say, is that we also still, and I mean, again, we could do a whole nother show just on this issue, is that addiction issues for folks of color, for queer folks, for low income folks, for folks that are just at the margins, the punitive actions taken towards those individuals,
Yeah.
they have these experiences, are incredibly devastating. And it's actually those stories that make it stigmatizing for everyone. Right? Makes it stigmatizing for everyone. And so I think it's really, really important for folks to remember that when you set that bar for how you support people at the most marginalized, how do you make space for the most marginalized? Everyone above that bar benefits. And so please make space and be mindful, as whether it is, you're sitting on a group that has to adjudicate a case against someone, has to make recommendations about continuing licensing, all of those kinds of things. One, go back to Amber's point of interrogating that power, but also recognize that, again, that these are things that people can come back from, and that these are medical issues that need attention, and that your space might actually be contributing to the problem. So, Merry Christmas. So, do what we can to create the best possible profession so that folks stay and folks thrive. So with that, to my guests, Cristie, Izzy, and Amber, thank you so much for joining me for today's discussion. It has been rich. Again, it pains me almost to end it right now because we could just go on and on. But there are chimpanzees somewhere out there that Izzy has to go do some sampling. I don't know, it's middle of the night or something there. But anyway, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. For viewers and listeners, be sure to stay tuned for the next episode of the Diversity and Inclusion on Air podcast. We are available on all podcast apps. Be sure to like and share the good news with your veterinary teams. And to that end, thank you so much again. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.